Risk can sometimes be a fairly abstract, theoretical, or technical thing to think and talk about. So in this talk, I just want to focus on something a little bit more casual, which is worry. What are you worried about? Just have a think for a moment and think things at the back of your mind, things at the front of your mind, things that keep you up at night. What do you most worry about? And how do you make that choice? It's probably not something you do deliberately, it's probably just something that happens. How come there are some things that are uncertain, that you're comfortable with the uncertainty, and other things that are uncertain that genuinely cause worry? How do we know what are the right things to worry about or to not worry about? Really, there are three broad sources of worry in people's lives. The first thing is we worry about things that have gone wrong before. We worry that they've gone wrong once and that they're going to happen again. Before my son's first flight, he was not worried about leaving bags on planes, but it happened once. And ever since then, that's always been a bit of a worry. It's gone wrong, will it happen again? We worry too sometimes about things that almost went wrong. We had a close call and the close call shook us up a little bit. That time I almost didn't put the brakes on in time and almost ran into the car in front of me is just a constant niggle. There was nothing that actually went wrong, but there was something that almost went wrong, and that's enough to cause a recurring fear. And then we worry too about things that have never happened to us, that have never happened to our friends, that have never happened to anyone we know, but they could happen, and we worry about that. So let's just have a look at each one of these things. Let's start with things that have gone wrong and ask, why do things happen again? Surely the fact that something has happened once is enough to remove a lot of the uncertainty. We now know that it has happened. We now know that it's possible to happen. Why don't we just do something and fix it? Why is it that things happen wrong over and over again in the same way? Well, it could be that we didn't notice it happen. It could be that it went wrong, but we just didn't become aware of it, either personally or more likely as an organisation. We didn't find out that something had gone wrong. It could be that because the outcome was fine, we didn't worry about it. So something went wrong, but we got away with it. And by getting away with it, that reduced the worry. Yeah, we know that this bad thing can happen, but we know that we can live through it. It's fine. It could be that we assumed it was freakish. We assumed, well, yeah, it's happened once, but surely it won't happen again. Surely we're not going to have two kids who decide that the right thing to do is to try to wield kendo swords while they're on top of the monkey bars. Oh, it's happened 3 times last week. Maybe there's something systematically going on. It could be that some of us learned, but others didn't. It could be that there are certainly some people who it's never going to happen again to, but that knowledge hasn't spread around the society or the organisation. It could be that we know that the bad thing has happened, but the explanations we've found are not explanations which we're capable of acting on. Well, we've decided that the machine broke, but it's not in our power to fix it. It's really up to management to spend the money, and management isn't willing to spend the money. So the explanation we've found, that it can only be fixed by management spending money, is not an action that we can take, and the people who can take it don't feel the same sense of worry that we do. It could be that we know what needs to be done, and it is an action that we could take, but it's not a priority. There are always many things to worry about, and how do we know what order to put those things in? Often things happen wrong again, simply because we decided that they weren't as important as other risks. It could be that we put in place a fix. We put in place something to protect against the thing happening again, but the fix didn't stick. A classic example of this in safety is where we're overly draconian in our response to a particular incident, and the new rules or efforts we put in place are simply not sustainable over time. A classic one is we simply tell people, look, you've got to be extraordinarily vigilant. You've got to look out and constantly be aware of danger. And the fact is that people can't constantly be vigilant. People can't, in particular, be extraordinarily vigilant by definition. And so people worry about it for the next week. For the next week, they're always watching out. For the week after that, they're watching out a bit less. Over time, they simply can't afford to keep worrying so much. Or it could be that the fix was too specific, in that we've fixed the problem happening in one particular way, but the problem happens in a slightly different way. We didn't generalize enough from the specific in order to come up with a broader class of solutions. So all of those are reasons why something that goes wrong could happen wrong again. How do we systematically think about things, though, that haven't even happened yet? How do you make sure that you're worrying about the right things when you don't have a list of things that have gone wrong in the past? Typically, the way we handle this in safety is with the use of checklists. So, classic checklist is to go through different types of energy. This is based around the theory that in order to hurt someone, most of the ways of causing harm involve applying energy to people. So if you think through all of the sources of energy and you think through how much energy there is, you can get a good idea of what to worry about. Think around the average house. Where is the most energy concentrated? Well, electricity is a big one. There's enough electricity just in every single power plug around the house to deliver a fatal dose to not just children, but adults. So high energy, therefore high danger. Houses that have a source of heat, such as a gas supply, again, very concentrated energy. And pretty much the only other really concentrated source of energy you have around a house is height. So falling from heights is another major source of injury around a house. Cover off those three, the electricity, the gas, and the heights, and you've covered off most of the very serious worries around a house. The other way that you can think through things is you can think in terms of life cycle. So we very often think of things in their steady state, but not always all the different times and ways in which they're used. So a classic example here are bridges. How are most people hurt on bridges apart from suicides? Well, don't imagine the bridge as it is now. Imagine the bridge being constructed. And there, if you think about when the bridge is put together, that's when bridges most often fall down, is while they're being built. That's when there's a large risk of being hurt. The other time there's a lot of injuries on bridges are when they're being cleaned or painted or inspected. So if you think through all the different ways in which something is used at different points in its life, you can think through where the dangers come. Another way of thinking is just in locations. Think around particular spots around a building, particular spots around a school, particular spots around a house. It tends to be that it's the locations that you don't imagine that people would be in, that they're sometimes in, where lots of the danger is. And then two further checklists. We won't go through them in detail, but activities, all the things that happen. We're fairly used to doing risk assessment based around activity. And then people. People who are meant to be there, people who are not meant to be there, different types of people of different ages, people of different mental capacities, people of different physical abilities, people of different physical vulnerabilities. These give you a sense of where the danger is. But if you were to systematically apply every one of these as a checklist to every situation, you would simply be overwhelmed with things to worry about. So here is the fundamental problem of applications of ideas of risk, is that we don't just need to have some way of identifying sources of risk. We need to have some way of classifying and prioritizing them. So how do we know what to really worry about? The classical approach is to divide risk into two dimensions. One of these is severity, the other is likelihood. We don't worry so much about things which have not much of either. So something that is very low likelihood and very low severity, we don't worry about. Something which has high severity, we worry about, but not if it's at the point where it's very, very low likelihood. So we might worry about explosions. They're rare, but they're common enough that they worry about, whereas we don't spend a lot of time worrying about alien invasion. Very, very serious, but on the other hand, so unlikely that doesn't even make it onto the threat horizon. At the other end of things, we worry about things that happen very common, but we don't worry about them if they're so not dangerous that they're not really considered harmful events at all. So do you worry about the fact that it might rain? Well, only if you're doing an activity for which rain is more of a problem than if you're simply sitting indoors watching it rain. Now, two particular areas I want to highlight. The first is where most of our danger and most of our worry comes, is actually from things that have both reasonable severity and reasonable likelihood. So this is one reason why vehicles are such a threat. Threat for people at work, threat for people in their home lives, threat for society as a source of fatalities as a whole. Because vehicle accidents, either vehicle to vehicle or vehicle to pedestrian, are both very, very serious, and they're something that has a very high likelihood of happening. The other extreme to think about are those things that we dismiss because we don't think they have high likelihood or high severity. I've actually deliberately preserved this slide from a talk I was giving a couple of years ago, in which my go-to example of low severity, low likelihood event was a return of Pokemon. Now, hopefully this video isn't already out of date, but Pokemon is a fairly big thing at the moment. And not only is it a big thing, but we have a spate of newspaper articles talking about people who have been injured while playing Pokemon. People whose quest for getting Pokemon on their phone has taken them onto roads, has taken them into dangerous areas, has caused them to not look where they're going and run into other things. So here we have the problem that actually just severity and likelihood are not sufficient dimensions. Because remember, we're forgetting the key element of risk, which is actually not severity or likelihood, but uncertainty. And classification does not remove uncertainty, or indeed deal very well with uncertainty at all. So even though we might use classification systems like risk matrices or like diagrams like this to work out what we should worry about, it doesn't do a good job of reflecting what we actually worry about. So what do we worry about? We worry about those things that we have least control over. We worry most about uncertainty. Fear comes from the things that we don't know about, but that we think maybe we should know about. Fear comes from things that we think we're expected to have control over, but we know we don't have control over. If you ask people at work, what are they most worried about? You'll find very quickly that they start describing things that are within the control of other people. They don't worry about themselves, they worry about things that they don't have control over. Now, uncertainty is a good thing. There are good reasons to believe that being uncertain, being in doubt, recognizing that you don't know everything, is the basis of learning new things. But on the other hand, being uncertain about what you can control is what tends to lead us to overreact, what tends to lead to us actually trying to apply too much control in ways that can actually increase risk, increase the likelihood, increase the severity, because we're just trying too hard to reduce our uncertainty.